This might not sit well with everyone, but I believe it needs to be said. What I'm about to share could challenge what you think you know, and it might even make you uncomfortable. But sometimes the truth demands to be told, no matter the consequences. You see, we live in a world where certain ideas and facts are brushed under the rug, ignored, hidden, or even distorted. Have you ever wondered why some truths are silenced while others are amplified? What I'm about to reveal could shift your perspective on something that most people take for granted. By the end of this video, you'll understand what's really going on and why this matters so much. You'll discover some lesser-known facts and surprising events that most people never hear about, either because they're too inconvenient or because they challenge the status quo. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end, because this could be one of the most eye-opening conversations you've heard in a while. But before we dive into it, let me take a moment to welcome you to Infinite Inspiration, your go-to place for thought-provoking ideas, untold stories, and the kind of content that makes you think twice about the world around you. If you enjoy videos like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Now let's get started, because this is something you need to hear. The world we live in today is moving faster than ever. Every day we're bombarded with more information, more opinions, and more distractions than our minds can handle. In this chaos, the truth often gets lost. It's not just that people are misinformed, it's that the sheer volume of noise makes it harder than ever to figure out what's real and what isn't. Think about it, when was the last time you paused to question the narratives you hear or the patterns you've started to accept without a second thought? This topic isn't just about curiosity or uncovering secrets, it's about understanding the forces that shape how we live and what we believe. It's about realizing that some of the things we consider normal today might actually be the result of manipulation, misinformation, or even neglect. And the timing couldn't be more important. As society becomes more interconnected, every decision we make has the potential to create ripple effects. What we believe, what we choose to ignore, and what we decide to act on doesn't just impact us, it impacts everyone around us. For example, let's talk about the way certain ideas are introduced to us. It's easy to assume that what we see, read, or hear is simply the truth presented as it is. But if you look deeper, you'll realize that most of the information we consume has been curated, filtered, or even distorted to fit a certain narrative. And why does this happen? Sometimes it's because of power. Sometimes it's because of profit. Other times it's because of fear of challenging long-standing systems, fear of being the odd one out, or fear of change itself. What's alarming is that many of us have become so used to this system that we don't even question it anymore. We scroll through endless feeds of news, opinions, and trends, assuming that what's popular must also be what's true. But popularity doesn't equal accuracy, and loudness doesn't equal honesty. In fact, some of the most important truths are whispered in corners while the loudest voices drown them out. And that's exactly why this conversation matters now. The stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't just my opinion, it's something that affects all of us, whether we realize it or not. The choices we make based on the information we're given could shape the future in ways we can't even imagine. And yet, most of us are too distracted or too overwhelmed to pay attention. We're living in a time when convenience often beats critical thinking, when fast answers overshadow deeper understanding, and when being part of the crowd feels safer than asking hard questions. But there's a cost to this way of living, and it's a cost we're already starting to pay. Just look at the growing polarization in our world. People are more divided than ever. Not because they're inherently different, but because they're being fed entirely different versions of reality. One group might believe one thing, while another believes the complete opposite, and both are convinced they're right. How can we solve real problems when we can't even agree on what the problems are? And then there's the issue of power. The people and systems that control the flow of information have an immense amount of influence over our lives. Think about it: the way you vote, the products you buy, the opinions you form, all of these can be shaped by the narratives you're exposed to. And while this isn't a new phenomenon, the scale at which it's happening today is unprecedented. Algorithms decide what we see and hear. Corporations decide what's worth promoting. And somewhere along the way, our own ability to think critically starts to fade. But let's not just talk about the problem, let's also consider why it's so hard to address. One reason is that questioning these systems often comes with a price. Speaking up can make you unpopular. It can lead to pushback, isolation, or even consequences that affect your personal or professional life. And yet, if we don't have these conversations now, when will we? If we keep ignoring the cracks in the foundation, how long before the whole structure collapses? Here's the uncomfortable truth: most of us are living in a world that's built on assumptions. We assume that the systems around us are fair. We assume that the information we consume is accurate. We assume that our decisions are entirely our own. But what if these assumptions are wrong? What if the reality we're living in isn't as solid as it seems? Take a moment to think about how information is presented to us. We trust the news to tell us what's happening in the world, but do we ever ask who decides what's worth reporting? We scroll through social media, assuming we're seeing an unfiltered view of reality, but algorithms are deciding what we see based on what keeps us engaged the longest. Even the opinions we hear most often can feel like the truth simply because they're repeated so much. And the more we accept these things without questioning them, the easier it becomes to miss the bigger picture. Here's the thing: ignoring these issues doesn't make them go away. It just allows them to grow stronger in the background, shaping our lives in ways we don't even realize. When we don't question the narratives we're given, we end up living in a version of reality that's been curated for us. And that version of reality doesn't always have our best interests at heart. Think about how this plays out in the real world. How often have you seen people arguing over things that don't really matter, while the real problems go unnoticed? It's not a coincidence. Dividing people over small disagreements is an easy way to distract them from the larger issues. And when people are distracted, they're easier to control. They're less likely to ask hard questions, to challenge authority, or to push for meaningful change. One of the hardest truths to accept is that many of the systems we rely on are designed to benefit a small group of people, while leaving the rest of us struggling. Whether it's in politics, economics, or even education, the people at the top often make decisions that serve their own interests, not ours. And yet we're told to trust these systems, to believe that they're working for us. But if they're really working, why do so many people feel like they're falling behind? Why does inequality keep growing, even in times of supposed progress? It's uncomfortable to admit, but part of the problem is that we've been conditioned to accept the way things are. From a young age, we're taught to follow the rules, to fit into the system, and to avoid asking too many questions. When something doesn't feel right, we're told it's just the way things are. And over time, we start to believe it. We stop questioning, we stop pushing back, and we stop imagining that things could be different. But the real-world impact of ignoring these issues is staggering. Take inequality, for example. When we accept the idea that some people are destined to succeed while others struggle, we're allowing a system of unfairness to continue. And that unfairness doesn't just hurt individuals, it hurts entire communities. It creates cycles of poverty, limits access to opportunities, and leaves millions of people feeling powerless to change their circumstances. But perhaps the hardest truth of all is that change isn't easy. It requires us to face uncomfortable realities, to challenge the way we've always done things, and to take action even when it feels overwhelming. And that's why so many people choose to ignore the problem. It's easier to pretend everything is fine than to confront the truth. However, ignoring the problem doesn't make us immune to its effects. It just delays the inevitable. The longer we wait to address these issues, the more damage they cause. And by the time we're forced to face them, it might already be too late to fix what's been broken. So what needs to be said is this: the world isn't as simple as it seems, and the systems we rely on aren't as trustworthy as we'd like to believe. It's up to us to question, to challenge, and to demand better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. Because if we don't, who will? I feel compelled to speak up because I've seen this issue play out in ways that are impossible to ignore. It's not just something I've read about or heard secondhand, it's something I've witnessed in real life over and over again. And every time I see it, I'm reminded of how deep these problems run and how much they affect people who may not even realize what's happening around them. I've watched people struggle not because they weren't trying hard enough, but because the odds were stacked against them from the start. I've seen how systems and structures can make it almost impossible for some people to move forward, no matter how much effort they put in. And yet, these same people are told to just work harder as if their struggles are entirely their fault. It's frustrating, it's heartbreaking, and it's wrong. One of the most eye-opening moments for me was when I started to notice the patterns. It wasn't just a random series of events, it was systemic. It became clear that there are mechanisms in place that benefit some while holding others back. And what struck me the most was how normalized it all was. People weren't questioning it because they'd been taught that this was just the way things are. But I couldn't accept that. I couldn't just sit back and pretend not to notice. It hasn't been easy to speak out about this. I've had moments where I wondered if it was worth it, where I felt like staying quiet would be simpler. But every time I've stayed silent, it's weighed on me. I felt this nagging sense that by not saying anything I was complicit. That's what finally pushed me to act. Staying silent felt like turning a blind eye, and I couldn't live with that anymore. There's a part of me that wishes I didn't have to talk about this. It's not easy to point out flaws in the system, especially when those flaws have become so ingrained in our daily lives. It's uncomfortable, it's risky, and it makes people defensive. But at the same time, I know that staying quiet isn't an option anymore. Because the truth is, the longer we ignore these issues, the worse they get. I've also seen the toll it takes on people when they start to wake up to these realities. It's like peeling back a layer and realizing there's so much more underneath, so much that's been hidden, dismissed, or forgotten. It can feel overwhelming at first, but it's also freeing in a way. Once you start to see the truth, you can't go back to the way things were. And that's why I feel so strongly about sharing this. If even one person starts to question what they've been told, if even one person starts to see things differently, then it's worth it. When I think about why this matters to me, I think about the people who've inspired me to speak up. The ones who faced these issues head on, who've refused to give up even when the odds were against them. I think about their courage, their resilience, and their willingness to fight for what's right. And I realize that if they can do it, so can I. And then there's the issue of how misinformation spreads. According to multiple analyses, false information travels significantly faster than the truth, especially online. Why? Because misinformation is designed to provoke strong emotions, like anger or fear, which leads people to share it without thinking. The more sensational it is, the more engagement it generates. And that's exactly what social media platforms thrive on. This creates a dangerous feedback loop where the most extreme, misleading ideas gain the most visibility. Meanwhile, accurate information, which often lacks that emotional punch, gets buried. This isn't just an online problem, it affects the way people make decisions in real-life decisions about voting, healthcare, and even how they treat each other. Let's put this into simpler terms. Imagine you're walking through a maze, and someone is supposed to guide you to the exit. But instead of showing you the full map, they only give you pieces of it, and some of those pieces are completely wrong. How likely are you to find your way out? That's exactly what's happening to us when we rely on curated or distorted information. We're making decisions based on incomplete or false maps, and we don't even realize it. Take a look at the economic system, for example. One argument you'll often hear is that the market rewards innovation and effort. But the reality is more complicated. A recent analysis revealed that the wealthiest 1% own more than half of the world's total wealth. That's not just a number, it's a reflection of how opportunities and resources are hoarded by a small fraction of people. Meanwhile, the majority of people are left to compete for the scraps. And yet, the narrative we hear is that anyone can make it if they try hard enough. It's a comforting idea, but it's not supported by the data. Even something as basic as access to information is unequal. In many parts of the world, millions of people don't have reliable access to the internet. For them, the digital revolution isn't an opportunity, it's just another barrier. Without access to the same tools and resources, they're left behind while others move forward. This digital divide is yet another example of how inequality shows up in ways we don't always think about. The logic here is simple. When the systems around us are flawed, the outcomes they produce will be flawed too. If we're building on foundations that are uneven, how can we expect the structures we create to be fair? And yet, we keep convincing ourselves that the system works because it's easier than admitting that it doesn't. Finally, let's talk about how ignoring these truths affects everyone, not just those at the bottom. Inequality and misinformation create instability. When people feel like the system isn't working for them, they lose trust in institutions. They become frustrated, angry, and more likely to turn against one another. This division weakens the fabric of society, making it harder for us to come together and solve real problems. These aren't abstract issues, they're facts that shape our daily lives. And the more we ignore them, the deeper these problems grow. We have to start paying attention because pretending these issues don't exist won't make them go away. It only ensures that they'll keep getting worse. I understand that not everyone will agree with what I'm saying, and that's okay. It's natural to feel skeptical, especially when what's being discussed challenges beliefs that many of us have held for a long time. Some might argue that the system isn't as flawed as I'm making it out to be. They'll say it works, that people just need to work harder, make better choices, or stop complaining. And I get it, believing in personal responsibility and merit feels reassuring. It gives us a sense of control, a sense that success is entirely within our grasp. Some people might also feel that talking about these problems is unproductive, that it's better to focus on solutions rather than pointing out what's wrong. I agree, solutions are crucial, but how can we fix something if we're not willing to acknowledge that it's broken? Ignoring the cracks in the foundation doesn't make them disappear, it just ensures that they'll grow wider over time. Acknowledging the problem is the first step toward finding real, meaningful solutions. Another argument I often hear is, life isn't supposed to be fair. Everyone has their struggles, and it's just part of the human experience, and that's true to an extent. Life will always have its challenges. But there's a difference between individual struggles and systemic inequalities. Individual struggles are unavoidable, they're a natural part of being human. Systemic inequalities, on the other hand, are man-made. They're the result of policies, practices, and structures that we've created and can change. Just because life isn't perfectly fair doesn't mean we should accept unnecessary injustice as inevitable. I know there's also a fear that questioning the system might lead to chaos. People worry that challenging the status quo means rejecting everything we know, that it might create instability or uncertainty. And that fear is valid. Change can be uncomfortable. But refusing to change when it's needed doesn't create stability, it creates stagnation. The goal isn't to destroy what works, it's to fix what doesn't. Progress isn't about tearing everything apart, it's about building something better. And then there's the argument that talking about these issues creates division. Some people might say, why focus on what separates us? Why not just focus on unity? That's a fair point, but here's the thing, true unity isn't about ignoring our differences or pretending that inequality doesn't exist. It's about addressing those differences and working together to create a fairer system. Real unity comes from understanding, not denial. I understand the doubts, the skepticism, and the resistance. These conversations are difficult, and they force us to confront uncomfortable truths. But they matter because the stakes are too high to ignore. Even if you disagree with me, even if you see things differently, I hope this perspective at least sparks some thought. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to argue, it's to understand. And understanding is where change begins. This is something I had to share, no matter the cost. The truth isn't always easy to confront, but it's always worth it. If nothing else, I hope this video has encouraged you to think critically about the world around you and to question the things we often take for granted. I don't expect everyone to agree, but I hope this sparks a conversation, one that leads to reflection, understanding, and maybe even action. Ask yourself, what can you do to make a difference, no matter how small? Sometimes it's as simple as staying informed, questioning the narratives we're fed, or even speaking up when you see something that doesn't sit right with you. Change doesn't happen all at once, it starts with small steps, with each of us choosing to pay attention and to care. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video and hear me out. If you found this thought-provoking or valuable, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more conversations like this, Don't forget to subscribe to Infinite Inspiration for more content that challenges, inspires, and informs. Together, we can create a ripple effect, one thought, one action, one conversation at a time.